Hi, I'd like to welcome back all my tree-loving friends to this We Care Tree Care presentation. Today we are going to discuss how to grow trees on a budget with a high survival rate for reforestation or landscape purposes. Let's start with a definition of a tree seedling. It is a very young tree, perhaps 1 or 2 years old, that has been grown from seed in a tree nursery. Deciduous seedlings are available as bare root specimens while dormant. This seedling is then typically transplanted outdoors in the spring for reforestation purposes. The young transplanted seedling is continually faced with threats from animal browsing and competing vegetation. Seedling cost is under $2 each, faster than growing from seed, but much cheaper than purchasing a juvenile tree at $200. Here are the topics we'll be covering today. I'd like to point out the tree in the photo. It was grown from a seedling, and this is after 2 seasons of growth. Here you see the standard method for planting seedlings for reforestation. It happens very quick. It's very cheap to do. However, these plants often find themselves just becoming deer food. The seedling planting method presented here was worked out after real field experience, with some successes and some failures. Here are some of the less than perfect attempts from earlier plantings. Here are the topics we'll be covering in the following how-to section. You'll notice that this extra effort will take a couple of hours per tree versus the few seconds it takes to plant the tree with the dibble planting method. So the very first step in planning your planting project is to determine where you'll be planting. It could be on your own property, private property of friends or family that you may want to assist with the planting, or as a total volunteer effort, you might contact your local parks department about planting on parkland. This planting project was done on my sister's recently purchased property that is loaded with a lot of dying ash trees. So what we are hoping to do is get some trees started as the ash trees die off, and also to establish a border around the edges of the property. Here are 2 projects I proposed to our local parks department. The one on the right was approved. The layout determined we'd be able to plant about 30 trees with a 40-foot spacing. Part of your layout will be understanding what obstructions may be underground or overhead. Also, the existing purpose of the land should be considered. You would not want to plant near a baseball diamond where players are likely to be running around or doing warm-ups. And regardless of your planting location, you may also want to take advantage of the 811 service. Call before you dig. Now that the initial layout is complete, you have a good idea of how many plants you'll need. I like to order from my local conservation office, as they offer native plants that are known to be easily grown in my area. You can also order seedlings from the Arbor Day Foundation or a commercial operation. There may also be a grower that is in your area that offers plants already acclimated to your local climate. If you're ordering online, know your USDA plant hardiness zone to select appropriate plants for your area. Take some time to read the plant descriptions before making a selection that best meets your goals and your site's characteristics. You can also check out my short video on tree selection. While waiting for our seedlings to arrive, we can start to collect the other materials needed for a successful planting. This includes compost, mulch, optional sheet mulch, stakes, and a protective barrier. There are many benefits and sources for compost. You'll need around 1 gallon of compost per tree as a soil amendment. So a 5-gallon bucket will provide startup nutrients for 5 tree plantings. You can purchase bagged compost from the garden center or get it in bulk. My preference is to find a free source in my local area. Check with your municipality, garden club, or perhaps a nearby farmer who raises livestock. I like to add compost directly into my planting hole. You could also leave the compost on the soil surface and let it percolate down as it rains. I like to say it sweetens the soil. There are also many benefits and sources for mulch. Some will argue that decaying mulch will rob the soil of nitrogen. This would be true if you tilled the fresh organic material into the soil, but the decomposition is only happening at the thin layer where the soil and the mulch make contact, so it should not be a problem. I would stay away from inorganic mulches like rubber or stone, as they do not decompose or feed the soil. Arborist wood chips are plentiful here in the Northeast, as this is a naturally forested area. There may be other sources of free mulch depending on your region. This slide will help calculate the amount of mulch needed. A typical chipper truck holds around 14 cubic yards of material, so don't be afraid to have a full load dumped at your planting location. If you decide to purchase mulch, I would buy in bulk. Delivery is usually available. I prefer a natural mulch that has not been dyed red or black. If you are doing a planting for your local parks department, they can easily drop you a load of wood chips from their tree pruning or tree removal operations. Some municipalities will also offer wood chips for pickup at their refuse yard, and commercial arborists are often looking for a nearby place to dump their chips. So listen for the sound of chainsaws in the neighborhood. When planting in an area of thick grass or weeds, you may want to consider an additional layer of vegetative suppressant. This should be made of an organic substance that will allow for the soil to still breathe and will decompose over time. Using plastic or any petroleum-based sheeting is not recommended. Using a sheet mulch is optional, but it will help avoid some of the back-breaking work of pulling weeds. Newspaper or cardboard might be an alternative, but some will argue that it blocks the air exchange until it decomposes. I was ready to use cardboard on this planting until I learned of a local coffee roaster willing to donate used burlap bags to my planting cause. You'll need 4 bags per tree. Another method to smother the turf would be to simply remove the top layer of sod and turn it upside down prior to mulching. There are many options for tree stakes. Fiberglass snowplow markers or bamboo stakes are too flexible to withstand high winds or an angry animal. Metal stakes are sturdy but must be removed later as the tree matures or it will become embedded in the tree roots. I prefer wooden stakes as they should not rot out until the tree grows to a sufficient size where the stakes are no longer needed. On the left are tree stakes reclaimed from a city planting project. You may also be able to find discarded 2x4s from a demolition project, but you'll need to remove the nails and cut the 2x4 into a 2x2 on a table saw. There are various materials that can be used as a protective barrier for your young seedlings. Many people immediately think of tree tubes for this purpose. However, they do have their pros and cons. Tree tubes are removed while your tree is still young, leaving it susceptible to deer rub and beaver damage. And then you'll have to deploy another form of deterrent as the tree continues to mature. My preference is to use a material that will protect the young seedling and that remains on the tree through to maturity. This plastic fence product is my preference for its small mesh size and its ease of cutting. Welded wire is my second choice, but its wider mesh opening still allows for moles and voles to chew at the bark of the tree. I encourage you to view my detailed description on protecting trees from deer to understand your options. As the arrival of your seedlings approach, you'll want to do a final layout at the actual planting location. You may want to plant in a random arrangement or a straight line, but the distance between trees may still be important. Dragging a measuring tape across the terrain to space plants is cumbersome, and you'll probably need 2 people to accomplish this. I find it easier to use a rope of some kind with graduated markings, as shown here. These garden stakes are inserted into the loops on the paracord to hold it in place. The other ends are moved about to their final position and marked accordingly. This layout can easily be performed by a single person. As you lay out your planting, be aware of other elements in the environment that you'll want to avoid. The paracord is depicted here in red. It is a great measuring tool if you have a penchant for equidistant spacing. If you are doing your layout while the ground is still frozen, you can mark your future planting hole with paint. If the ground is not frozen and you have your compost ready, you can begin to dig the actual holes. Here is another way paracord was used on a straight line planting along a property boundary. The graph paper was used for the initial layout, and the paracord was used to ensure the design was easy to implement in the field. Always be absolutely sure where your property line is before planting. Having a dispute with your neighbor is never fun, especially if you have already planted. You may want to check with your municipality for any ordinances on this subject. Here we used paracord to delineate the property line and measuring tapes for precise distance management. Prepping your planting site is performed prior to the seedling's arrival. The following tasks can be done all at once or broken down across multiple days if you have yet to gather all your materials. Once the ground is no longer frozen in the spring, you can begin to prep your individual planting holes. Again, our 5-gallon bucket provides a guide to the size of the hole to be dug. We want to add approximately a 25% ratio of compost into the native soil. A 5-gallon hole requires about 1 gallon of compost. The goal is to incorporate compost well before the actual planting date to allow the microbes to begin decomposition. When digging a hole in clay soil, the sides often become smooth. So you want to score the side of the hole with your shovel and return your soil compost mix back into the hole. Here's a pro tip when planting in a lawn. First remove the thin layer of turf from the surface and then dig your deep hole. After returning the amended soil, place the hunk of turf upside down on top of the dirt pile. The turf will be smothered and the hole will settle after some time. A post-driving tool will be helpful if you are working alone. If you plan to use a sledgehammer, bring a helper to steady the stake. Your 6-foot stake will go 2 feet into the ground with 4 feet above the ground. Keeping the stakes straight will allow the protective cage to be lifted on and off. The 5-gallon bucket lid we used to space our stakes measures 12 inches. Adding the posts adds another 4 inches for a total diameter of 16 inches. So cut your mesh to 48 inches for a tighter fit over the stakes. This material again, it cuts easily with a razor knife. If using welded wire fence, you'll want to have a pair of wire cutters and follow the same measurements. This mesh product has enough rigidity to stand up without support. The stakes only hold it in place while the tree grows. The cage size will allow the tree to grow large enough where deer rub is no longer a threat. The cage also allows the seedling some movement in the wind, which strengthens the stem. I did learn not to use plastic snow fence as it is too flimsy and becomes brittle quickly. So just overlap the material by a few inches and secure with cable ties. Attach a protruding screw near the top of the stake or both stakes. This will keep deer from lifting the mesh off the stakes. It will also help to deter the casual vandal from disturbing the cage. This completes our planting site preparation. Now we are ready for the long-awaited day of planting. Previous preparation performed at each planting hole was to minimize the effort on the actual day of planting. If you can't plant immediately, your seedlings should be refrigerated in damp newspaper or heeled in to retain moisture. However, do not store with roots in water. But if you are planting on a sunny day, do place the seedlings in a bucket of water to prevent from drying out. Our first step is to remove the protective cage. Dig your hole again with sufficient space to spread out the roots. Also shown are the optional fertilizer tablets. These tablets can be inserted in the side of the hole, but not touching the roots. You can also just push the tablet into the surface soil after the seedling is planted. Trees generally don't require fertilizer, but these tablets will dissolve slowly over 2 years and may provide benefit if you have very poor soil. One of the most common planting mistakes is to plant too deep. Please note where the stem flares out and the first roots appear. You may also notice a color change at the root flare. The surface of the soil should be at the root flare. If your seedling has a fibrous root system, try to spread the roots out in the hole while carefully returning soil to the hole. Press the seedling firmly in place with your foot. This helps to eliminate any air pockets. You can also use water, if available, to eliminate the air pockets. Do not stomp and over-compact the soil. Next, place your first 2 burlap bags on the ground and cut slits to accommodate the stakes. Get as close as possible to the stem to inhibit vegetative competition, but do not come in contact with the stem. Place the next 2 bags against the stakes and fold all the edges towards the seedling to form a more condensed and thicker mat of burlap. Next, place a light cover of mulch around the seedling and out to the stakes. Place the mesh back over the stakes. Drop a wheelbarrow of mulch on each side of the planting area and spread the mulch to cover the burlap. Pro tip: dump your mulch towards the stake to prevent pushing the mesh towards the seedling. Also, it is important to cover the burlap completely with a generous amount of mulch, as any exposed threads of burlap can become tangled with the lawnmower's blades. And that, my friends, completes our planting. Following the planting instructions, the time spent on aftercare should be minimized. But it's always fun to visit your planting often to check on its growth. You will also be able to spot any problems and plan for corrective action if needed. If you plant native trees, they will support many beneficial insects, so don't worry if you see some minor foraging holes in the leaves. The plastic mesh and staking is designed to provide protection and stability, but can also be easily removed for inspection. Living in western New York, the rainfall is usually sufficient to support plant growth without supplemental irrigation. However, a newly planted tree should be watered in whenever possible, especially if planting during hot and dry weather. This will ensure the delicate new roots do not dry out and the transplant can establish itself well in its new environment. No pruning should be done in the first year as the plant needs all its leaves while it tries to establish itself. The before and after photos show a seedling in its second year of growth. The lowest branches, marked in yellow, were removed. Marked in red, the upper branches will remain as temporary branches, but are reduced to no larger than a pencil in width and length. The temporary branches are left to help the tree develop good taper, a gradual thickening of the stem from top to bottom. As the tree matures and starts to branch out the top of the 4-foot plastic mesh, these temporary branches will also be removed. I also suggest you check my other video, How We Prune, for tips on developing good structure. In year 3, as the seedlings develop a larger crown, you will no longer be able to remove the plastic mesh completely, but you can still reach down into the mesh for pruning. You can also lift the mesh off the ground enough for weeding and pruning the lowest branches or removing suckers. The upper branches that will form the crown of the tree are referred to as the permanent scaffold branches and should allow for a riding mower to operate underneath without collision. Weeds are competing with your seedling for sun, nutrients, and moisture. You may find weeds growing on top of your mulch, and some may be growing through the mulch. You can hand pull the weeds or spray weed killer if on your own property. Be sure to protect the plant from overspray. Having a helper hold cardboard around the base of the tree while you're spraying is recommended. Weeds very near the stem should still be hand pulled. Pro tip: unless you are a licensed applicator, you cannot spray pesticides other than on your own property, and some municipalities have totally banned Roundup use on their properties. Still, keeping a thick mulch ring is still the best way to avoid this time-consuming and laborious task. Do not worry if you see mushrooms or other weird fungus growing in your mulch. Fungus is just another decomposer of organic material. It actually proves that you are mimicking the natural environment found on the forest floor. I like to just leave it in place. This aftercare task will require a good amount of effort, but probably the most beneficial to the plant's long-term survival. The benefits of mulch are worth repeating. It suppresses weeds, retains moisture, adds nutrients, and keeps the mower away. Always be on the alert for the sound of the arborist's chainsaw in the neighborhood and ask for a chip drop. Keeping a stockpile of wood chips is recommended if you have the room. As the fresh wood chips decompose, they actually are becoming more nutrient dense. Lawn care is one of the biggest threats to trees in a landscape. Eventually, this chronic lawn care will sever the tree's vascular system, causing death. Any tree wound is an invitation to disease entering. Once damage is done, there is not much that can be done to repair the bark. It is no longer recommended to paint over tree wounds. On the right, our plastic mesh was damaged by the riding mower. I have also seen gator bags damaged in this same way. So again, the message is to mulch often. Hopefully, if you have taken the proper precautions, you won't see any of this damage on your young trees. The tree stakes on the left did not deter a beaver from trying to build his lodge. So caging the tree with a plastic or wire mesh is always recommended, but not foolproof, as you can see on the right photo. People using this public area often park on the grass. Note the high visibility tape that was applied after the first time someone backed over the stakes. Fortunately, the seedling was still flexible and was able to be stood back up. Sometimes it's hard to tell if damage was caused by animal or human. The damage on the left can be pruned off and a new central leader should eventually take over. The tree on the right will not recover. The best part of aftercare is just watching the growth develop over time. I suggest your first tree project be limited to 10 or 20 trees of a fast-growing nature with adaptability to most soils. The sycamore filled that bill for me. You never know what you'll find when you visit your trees, especially when planting in public places. Sometimes folks with good intentions do some unusual things. I hope some of these suggestions make sense to you. Use those that might apply to your situation. Your access to materials, the amount of time available, and your budget may be variable. Any of these steps can be eliminated or modified as you find your best way of planting and developing trees. Thank you for watching. Please like my We Care Tree Care Facebook page for occasional updates on tree care topics, and subscribe to my YouTube page for future instructional videos. Happy planting! Now that you've made it to the very end of the presentation, be sure to share this tree talk with all your friends.